Oh, good. Okay.
Hello, everybody. A bit of an apology because we've been wrestling with technical difficulties between New York and Pennsylvania and the world. And
try Tennessee. Tennessee.
Yes. Oh, Tennessee. Yes. He was going to wear a coonskin cap for the occasion, but I dissuaded him.
No. I got rid of that when I was at the UN. I used to wear it there.
in Tennessee.
Indeed, yeah.
So, hello, this is Ian Williams, President of the Foreign Press Association, and it gives me a great deal of pleasure and even a hint of nostalgia to welcome Tom Osborne, with whom we used to share a sort of corridor at the United Nations when Tom was the correspondent for CBS, wasn't it?
ABC.
Sorry,
that's all right. They're all the same. It doesn't matter. They're all gone.
Yeah, and I've appeared on all of them. In fact, I was on Good Morning America with ABC once. Because it's apropos of now. I interviewed the Sheikh who was charged with the first World Trade Center bombing.
Very appropriate, yes.
So I was dragged out at the crack of dawn for the breakfast show on it. So 9/11 is us, in a sense. Between
9/11 is us. That's right.
And we were both dealing with the aftermath at the United Nations when we watched with disbelief as the US framed a guilty man, trying to put Saddam Hussein in the frame for the alleged. He was guilty of almost everything else in the world.
No, they blamed him for everything. You might as well.
I mean, and this really brings us into the subject because Tom has just written a memoir of working with Peter Jennings, and I'm presuming that our memories haven't faded that quickly. But Peter Jennings was a giant amongst anchors and correspondents. For a start, once again, apropos of 9/11, he was cosmopolitan, vain. He was Canadian. And,
yes. Well, that was
so he knew there was a world beyond the parallel, an unparalleled world that he could look at.
Indeed, yeah.
He kept that sensibility, which was something I've just written for the FPA about the shock for many Americans to discover that Afghanistan was affecting them, because one of the issues here was this was the first time that foreign policy was affecting Americans instead of being something that Americans inflicted on other people.
We know that
Peter Jennings knew this, so I think he had that sensibility, which he did manage to convey. So, Tom, over to you. Tell us about Peter Jennings.
Yeah, I would just say the most important. You brought it out, Ian. Exactly. He was discovered by Roone Arledge, the Wide World of Sports. Remember him? Maybe some do, some don't. But he was a great figure here, and he became president of ABC News. And he brought Peter on, but the whole idea between the two of them was to bring world news to ABC and to put the world back in world news and make it a serious network, because at that time it was competition with CBS and NBC. But I wrote this book actually to capture the time we had at the UN, and of course a lot of it is devoted to. We can talk about that too. To Bosnia and Iraq. I didn't do a lot of it on Iraq in the book, but Bosnia for sure. But it was also because it was a whole decade in which I worked with one of the most, as you say, one of the prime anchors in the country, maybe even the world. I don't know, but he was a Canadian, and he became an American citizen at the end of his life. But he was a Canadian, and that's one of the things that Americans liked about him, because he was objective, and they got used to the fact that he was a Canadian, but they liked it because they could believe him. They believed him. He was objective enough, and so that was the reason I wanted to write the book, and I'm so glad I did, because I remembered a lot of things that I just had forgotten. But one of the prime things, and I bring this up to all of us who are there, was the United Nations assignment in 1990 and the launch of Operation Desert Storm, and getting Saddam out of Kuwait. That was a major thing. It was my first assignment at the UN, and that lasted for the next 10 years. Bosnia was about 92, 95, but Iraq, as you know, was really intense, and it didn't ever end for me. I lived that story for 10 years, and it was about getting rid of the weapons of mass destruction, the invasion, all that, 1, 2, 3, 4. But when I came to UN, that was really, I think it was a very special time. Maybe you agree with me. The world was kind of in an enormous upheaval. There was the breakup of the former Yugoslavia. It was the Gulf War, Desert Storm, and then we had on the horizon the Saddam and his weapons. And then you had, on top of that, you had this European ethnic cleansing and genocide going on, and with Bosnia, and so it was a very important time to be covering the United Nations. And of course, for Peter Jennings, there were two stories that were always at the top, and that was Iraq and Bosnia. So that was my life. I had to go that way. Also, I forgot to mention the collapse of the Soviet Union, which changed a lot of things
really
for
big,
us.
Yeah,
I might as well
overlook.
just let me throw that in if I might. But one of the things about my job was so great about it is I had a perch at the United Nations. I didn't have to deal with the ABC Bureau. I had a lot of independence and working directly for Peter. So I had 2 to 3 people that I had to talk to at ABC, and that was it. And as long as I kept those people happy and Peter happy, everybody was happy. There was only one moment in which we dropped the ball. We can talk about that later. But as you mentioned, Ian, he was one of the big 3, and the last of the big 3 in 2005. He died, but the other 2 had left before that. It's interesting though. He had a job. He started in broadcasting. Maybe some folks would be interested in this. In my research, he started, well, I knew it from when I worked with him, but I discovered a lot of things. One of the things, he left high school to find a job in broadcasting, and he never returned. He was the only anchor without a high school diploma. And it didn't embarrass him at all. He carried it very well. In fact, I think he was proud of it. But he wanted to follow in his father's footstep, who's Charles Jennings, who was a major anchor in the CBC, very much like our Walter Cronkite. And though Peter eventually found himself a position as a correspondent with CBC, and then ABC picked him up when in his mid-20s. But what was interesting—
ABC is Canadian Broadcasting. We should explain to people who don't know.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Canadian Broadcasting. Yes, my apologies. But one of the interesting moments, I think, in his career was when he was in his mid-20s, kind of funny, from 65 to 67. Peter was just coming into mid-20s, and he was the network was trying to differentiate itself from the other 2 networks, NBC and CBS. So they put Peter in the anchor chair in his mid-20s, and thinking that they would really depart from this old standard Brinkley and Cronkite. But, it was really a bridge too far, and he was way too young. And as a matter of fact, he was too good looking to fit an anchor of those days. He just didn't make it.
He wasn't avuncular enough.
No, he wasn't. Well, he was actually, but he wasn't. He was too young for that position. So he asked to be sent back, and he got put back as a foreign correspondent again. But they were ready to. He was basically in a position at that time where he was just kind of rising as he went along. He got more and more. I think he was that iconic. He's credited with that iconic trench coat from each capital, Paris, London, wherever he was. He had the same raincoat on, and it started this whole trend where all these foreign correspondents had to have this raincoat. It got to be a big deal in a way, strange enough. But
the trench coat was like the hat with the press ticker, and
iconic. Exactly. In our time, right. Well, I should say in 1987, one of Peter's staff recruited me, and that's when I got there. But one of the things that was interesting to me about Peter Jennings and working for him was that we were almost exactly 10 years apart, which meant that he was covering the Vietnam War and Cambodia, even U.S. civil rights, while I was marching in. So we had that 10 years difference, but it was close enough and not too far. And then of course, I had this direct contact with him, which was really extraordinary. He was on my phone. I could get hold of him if I had to, and you always knew that you could get that news to them. And with so much coming out of the UN at that time, we had so much that we had to deal with, but I knew that there were 2 or 3 people that I could deal with. And that made it a lot easier. I guess if you read my book, or you had a chance to, you might notice, as I said, Bosnia was a big deal for us. And from 92 to 95, the main stories that I covered. I think at that time, we were really trying to, Peter was very, very, I should say, critical of the US and on the Bosnia, in particular, both Bush and the Clinton administrations, because he saw them as the last superpower, or the only nation that really could help. And of course, we all know the elephant in the room was, everybody's talking big time. We're going to help send help to Bosnia, send humanitarian help. Really, it was really doing nothing. And the Security Council, and this is the story we were trying to tell, is that there was a big betrayal going on of Bosnia at that time. And it was hard to tell that story, but it was so important. And I think that's what made the direct connection so important. And one of the people that were really outstanding, I have to give a hurrah to, is maybe you will too, is Ambassador Diego Aria, who was president of the council at that time. And if you put him together with Mo Shockerby, you had a good thing going. And but one of the things
Mo Shockerby was the Bosnian ambassador to the UN, and also later the foreign minister of Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Exactly. And one of the interesting things about him that people probably don't know about, you do probably, Ian, is that he had a dual citizenship. And he was one of the things that I was part of the person I liked about him was he really irritated Sir David Haney. And he would go talk to him like a New Yorker instead of like a little man from Bosnia. And Haney just couldn't deal with it. Really, he was flummoxed. And so
totally patrician British, wasn't he?
Exactly. Oh, yeah.
I did like Sir David Haney when he looked down his nose at Madeleine Albright and said, "No, Madeleine, no, Madeleine,
no."
So I appreciated him for that, but Mo had him right.
Well, Mo had him right. But one of the things that Haney used to call him off campus, he used to call him ambassador of Staten Island. So he was, they had a thing going, but of course it's a natural problem because of the whole thing about the Islamic State in the heart of Europe and all the Western attitude about that. And Haney, of course, was leading the pack, and along with France. But one of the things that happened, I would mention to you in the book, I think is interesting. In the last several years, Peter focused a lot on religion in America because he saw the foul mouth of campaigns and the way we were talking to each other. And he saw the beginnings of this disintegration and this division that we have right now. His first contact with the far right, actually, though, was the Davidian people. That's when his lights really went on, about 2005, just before he died. But can
we remind people?
Yes.
This is the Branch Davidian. These are the ones that were shut up in the ranch.
Right, they were shut up in the ranch, and actually they were the first, I would say, visible evidence of what we had in America going on. We had these various groups of cultic groups, much like we see now with Trump.
I mean, they were completely cookie, but they didn't deserve to get shut up the way they were, as though it was a.
But they also were not a part of our government. And unfortunately, the alt-right has now won seats in Congress. So we're not we're talking out there. They're out there. They're with us, and that's very
out there. They're up there.
Yeah, it's very frightening actually to think about. But anyway, Peter was onto this, and he raised my interest in it. And there was one documentary that he did in the name of God. And in that documentary, he basically looked at the Christian evangelical movement, which was, where Falwell was, and, time to get saved, baptized, and registered to vote. And it was like this circle: we are the moral people and you're not. And that that is what the way of thinking is today, right now, only it's on steroids in America. I wish you could be here. It's really unsettling, really. But at that time, I think, interesting enough, when the three networks left, and I cover this, when the big three were out of there, you had sort of a place that we were getting our information from someplace altogether different. And it was almost like a fire hose of information that came out. And then this happened along with the internet and all of that. And eventually one thing fed into another, and you have the situation that we have here today. And it really is something that I wish Peter were here. I think he would be very good at covering this. One of the things I know he would be all over would be this business of the worldwide pandemic. And we've got these doctors and these governors and so on and so forth, are these governors who are feeding people with the wrong information, telling them they don't need to wear masks and banning the wearing of masks. And actually, this is something I think he would take on, and he would be very good at it. He was good at taking people like that on, and I think also he would of course address the issues of how we're dealing with our children and the young people. We're actually we have young people in the pediatric wards because people won't wear a mask. And that's just where we're at. And I don't know how it's going to change, but it's really kind of frightening here.
How would you put this in the journalistic standards? Because what Peter did, and some others of us were trying at the same time, was to abandon, I used to call it the Columbia J school, that there are two sides to everything and you have to present both sides impartially. Whereas I was told a journalist's duty was to look at the two sides impartially and then work out which one was the fraud and which one wasn't, and identify the fraudulence. So, I mean, in the case of Bosnia, for example, there was a strong feeling that there's two sides here. So we were on, a lot of the press were equating the genocidal maniacs with Milosevic along with the massacred Bosniaks, for example.
Yeah.
And on later cases now they're saying that the governors who ban masks is just a different view. It's not a life-threatening thing. It's just a different view, and we have to give due respect to people who say that you can inject yourself with animal worm powder. And this is better for you.
Well, no, I that's one of the things that I want to question, and I intend to. Where do you draw the line? I mean, when do you say you're not writing the rules for me anymore? I think that's another part of it. There are, and you're right. Peter did reach out to the right wing in his career. At the end of his career, he reached out to them, and he thought that their stories should be heard, because that's the only way you understand the intersection of politics and religion in America, is to look at the other side. And really, that's my position too. I'm down here in Tennessee, of course, and I'm surrounded by this. And so you do have to realize that these are people who have lived alongside of you, and that they are brothers and sisters and husband and wives, and the neighbor down the way whom you cannot have a civil conversation with, because they're getting all this information from the internet and the sort of conspiracies, etc. But Peter made a good effort to look at that side of it, and I think that's something that we have to remember too.
Well, in the case of Bosnia in particular, I remember, because we're doing the same thing, and that in Bosnia there was a tendency, you went to see what the great powers had to say. You went to see what Madeleine Albright or predecessor at the UN had to say, and that was one version, and you might throw in an alternative view. But it was one of the few occasions when the Security Council was, in a sense, working, because these smaller powers like Diego Aria from Venezuela, I remember Terry Gallagher, the New Zealand ambassador, and others, they showed that small powers can have an effect, because they said, up with this, we will not put. They enforced delegations to to Sarajevo, to Belgrade, and they basically said, "You've got to do something." They shamed the Hanais and the others, because Hanai wasn't anti-Bosnian. I'd spoken to him. Him and Douglas Hurd, the British Foreign Secretary, their view was the Serbs are going to win anyway, so why don't the Bosnians just lie down and die and save everyone the mess? That was their attitude.
That's exactly the position they were in. They why don't you just go away? We don't see this. It was astounding to me at the time, to see what was going on. I'm sure to you too. It was hard to look at both sides at that time. They were being pounded, by the weapons and artillery from the former Yugoslavia, and it was so. And then they put an arms embargo over the whole territory, so that the Bosnians could get nothing. I mean, the Muslims could get nowhere. So it was clear, how
the other side had the whole Yugoslav army arsenal.
Yes, exactly. And
this
so,
was impartiality in practical effect. So we ban arms shipments. That shows we're even-handed. But one side's got all the arms and the other doesn't.
Yeah, it's nice. It's like
getting a sumo wrestling a 2-year-old in the dojo and saying, "You fair fight. Go fight it out."
Right. That's exactly right. Right. And I think one of the things that I liked about Arya was he really was, as you say, one of the smaller nations, but he was an individual who really stood up, and he was going against the grain, of course, and Hani and Merimée knew that
Merimée was the French ambassador.
The French ambassador, Jean-Claude Merimée, and he both of them were aware of the fact that his government had been relieved of him. Diego Arya, his government was overthrown by Hugo Chavez, and so he said his opinion was, my president appointed me to this position, and I'm not going to go anywhere until I have further notice. So he managed to stretch that out. He had about a half a year left in his term, and of course he served as president too, with all that going on. But then Hani and Merimée went to their governments and said, "This guy's overstaying his seat, and I'm sick of hearing him in the council about Bosnia." So they silenced him and basically got him thrown off. But then Kofi Annan picked him up and put him as special advisor on Bosnia. So he was back in the game again. So I mean, that's the kind of guy he was. Well, Mo was the same way. He was something out of nowhere, and it just became what he had to become. And that was interesting to watch, all of that at the time. And of course, really made it great for me is that I was talking to the people who were inside the Security Council, listening to the deliberations as you were, and getting all this information about what they were really saying. And that was going directly to Jennings. And so he was really on his high horse about it. So that's the way our network was covering it, just because of that fact. So it was really a great time. And also, let's talk a little bit about the issue of Iraq. You and I both were there, and I cover that in the book as well. And that was a really different situation. I don't know about you, but what I did over the years, over the decade, was to really follow the inspectors. I got really close to the inspectors, and one after the other, it didn't matter, go from one to the other. One didn't work, you go there, go to the next one. But the really principal inspectors always leveled with me. I never got sold out. And if they told me that something was going to happen, it happened. I remember once CBS had a story, and it was the top of their news. It was from the UN. And of course, I don't think did they have a full-time correspondent? I'm not sure. I don't remember.
I don't think they did.
I don't think they did. But anyway, this was a huge story. It was on the first story out of Dan Rather's mouth. And I was on my way home. So Peter was seeing this on CBS. And what the story was, they had a picture of somebody's arm. And they said that was evidence of Saddam Hussein's experimentation on humans. That was the story. And Peter called me. I was like, the phone was just unbelievable that I had to go back to the UN. And I said, well, the reason I didn't report it is because it's not true. And I'll prove that. And so I went up to that floor. It's what is it, 37th floor? I think you're not allowed at all. They said, get out of here. You're not allowed in here. I said, I want to see so-and-so. And that person was a really great source for me. I said, this is what's going on. Do you know this? No, that's what? And I said, I need you to come down and knock this down right now. I need you to come downstairs and say this is not true. And he did. And it was killed. But, that's the kind of relationship you could have when you lived at the UN. I mean, you couldn't just come in the front door.
That's journalism as opposed to reporting, stenography. Stenography is saying what figures of power want you to say, and journalism is weighing and evaluating what they're saying. And right. I mean, in the words of the British interviewer, I think it was Jeremy Paxman, he said, I always look at them and say, why is this lying bastard lying to me?
Well,
which is unkind, but a fair working assumption.
The correspondents that were there full time all those years, you knew when somebody was lying, and you're just gonna knock it off and go to the truth, find the person with the truth. But it was an amazing time, and of course the whole epic struggle of accounting for Saddam's weapons was really, really quite a show, and a lot of manipulation there.
We had Hans Blick several times.
Oh yes,
and he was a person of manifest integrity.
Oh, absolutely.
When he was there, and the big mystery was, which was almost a psychological, why was Saddam Hussein refusing? He wouldn't give evidence that he had no weapons because he wanted people to believe he had weapons on the one level, because he would be emasculated if he didn't have weapons of mass destruction. But on the other hand, obviously he didn't want people coming down like a ton of bricks if he did. So he was prevaricating. And Hans Blix explained these thought processes quite well. He was the Swedish head of the nuclear section of the inspectorate.
He was great, honestly. You're right, integrity. And he was the only one that really could explain it. Not for everyone, but for us. And but we had to interpret, as you say, we had to tell that story so people could understand it. That those weapons, that this is what's going on. He's surrounded by all these enemies, and he's saying, I got these weapons and I might use them. And then he's saying to the U.S., I don't have any. And it was two ways.
But then you have the difficulty with journalism, like in most spheres of life. The question of it's sort of binary politics, good and bad, good and evil. How do you say that Saddam Hussein doesn't have weapons of mass destruction, but he is an evil, murdering bastard anyway?
That's the problem.
Somehow, most of us have great difficulties in presentation on this.
Most people that I would say that to, talk to about that, said, you know what? I don't care. I don't care. I don't want him around. I just don't want him. I don't care what your story is. Get rid of him. And that, of course, gave the U.S. a hand. They could do whatever they want, and they did.
Framed a guilty man, is what I said at the time.
They did. And of course, I was really, I don't know about you, but I was really shocked at the way he ended. I don't know how that happened. I never did get that story, but it just seemed so. No, you shouldn't do that. Just put him away somewhere. Just take him out.
I'm opposed to the death penalty, especially for my enemies.
Well, for anyone. I mean, I'm with you. I have a lot of problems with that, but that was particularly disgusting. So we have a lot of memories of that, and of course we were accounting for those weapons all the way till 2000 almost, and you never, like you said, you could never get a straight story. And
it was also unpatriotic, and Peter skirted it with there. But I mean, to get up and admit that maybe the US's own actions had something to do with Afghanistan and the Taliban made you a thought criminal.
Mm-hmm.
That explaining the ideas of blowback, of the idea that if you arm a bunch of religious bigots to go fighting and killing for your side, you can't be too surprised when they change the rules and use the weapons and the money and the connections you've made to come and fight you afterwards.
Exactly. I mean, we've seen that all over the world, haven't we? And we have to learn it over and over and over again. But it's like Bosnia. Well, they resisted going into Bosnia, and everybody pounded them because they didn't go into Bosnia. But if they had gone into Bosnia, there you go, you have the whole problem all over again. But they were very, very resistant. They didn't want to do that. It was also the Vietnam syndrome was still at work.
Well, if you remember, the Clinton administration was being hounded by the Republicans for putting American lives at risk for, quote, liberal democracy elsewhere. Right. I mean, the Republicans who now spent these years getting us into Iraq and Afghanistan were the ones who were excoriating Clinton every time he leaned towards active intervention in Bosnia. And Peter reported on this as well. It was Clinton who announced to the world that we weren't going to put any ground forces into Kosovo. Right. And Milosevic sat in Belgrade and said, "Oh, bloody great! Yes, I can do what the hell I like. Thank you, Mr. Clinton. Yeah. That's a carte blanche."
So was it Clinton? Clinton had the lift and strike option, and what that amounted to was that they would lift the arms embargo, and then Bosnia could defend itself, and if they had to, they would come in and help them. But it was sort of a halfway thing, and everybody said, "Nah, we're not going to do that." He was trying to do something. His hands were tied. Britain and France had wanted nothing to do with it. So
actually, the British changed halfway through. They were the ones who said, "We have to move artillery into Bosnia."
Well, that's interesting.
That was the Serbs had gone far enough. They said we should withdraw the peacekeepers, and everyone said, "No, you can't do that." Yes, but that's so we can go back in. Seriously.
That's very interesting. Yeah, very interesting. Good point. Good point. The French never came around, I don't think, though, did they?
They did at the end, but I think Milosevic went too far when Mladic and the Serbs actually held French peacekeepers hostage.
Oh God!
That was a petit pas too far.
Yes, exactly. And so I think those two stories were really amazing and very intense through all of those years. And I know I learned a lot about doing it and things that I never thought I would hear and see. I saw. So,
was Peter ever attacked for being sort of un-American and unpatriotic, for sort of pointing out the truth?
Yes. Yes. He was actually, he had people on both sides of the aisle. People didn't know whether he was a Republican or a Democrat. I can't tell you either, because I don't know. And I was with him day and night. All I can tell you is he was very American. He loved America. He had a constitution in his pocket, and he became a citizen. So, he was, I don't know where he'd come down on the party stuff, but I do know, you're right. He didn't care, really. He didn't care. He was most interested, like, as you say, in pointing out what was obvious, and everybody should see this. That was his way. And it didn't matter what you were talking about. And I think that's why I pointed out, I think if he were here today, he really would be taking on these governors he would be asking them, well, Governor, what are you doing? I don't know that you saw it. It's in my book, but maybe you folks saw it. It was an exchange that Peter had with Bill Clinton in his library. He had been going along a tour of the library, Clinton, brand new library, Clinton and him walking along, and Clinton's, blowing off about this, and this is what I did here, and this is what I did there. And then they finally got to a room, and he said, this is mostly about war, isn't it? Peter said. And yeah, yes, it is. Would you have a room for peace? And things were just starting. You could see it crumbling, right there, that the good times were over. And then they got in one across each other. And so Peter starts out and he says, well, he asked him a few questions, a few softballs. Then he got to the fact that historians had rated presidents. And he came in 5 on the economy, 4 on something else, and like 30 on morality. and Clinton just went apoplectic in the library, his own library. And so he said he really got one of those finger pointing Clinton things. And the two of them,
I did not sleep with that woman.
Exactly. The two of them were facing off, and Clinton, the president, went off and he said, I had a greater following then when I started my presidency, I got a standing ovation at the United Nations. I was there. And I thought to myself, yeah, these guys would give a standing ovation for that anytime. Most of these guys in the room would do that. And so he wasn't really getting much. But he said, I don't care. I really don't care, Peter. I don't care. And Peter said, oh, yes, you do, Mr. President. I can see it across the room. You care. Ooh, yeah. And Peter, and then Clinton comes back and he says, Peter, don't go there. And Peter went. And it was just like that, back and forth and back and forth. Peter didn't give an inch. You know, he said, yes, you do. You do care, Mr. President. I know you do. And he really drove it home. So I really appreciated that about Peter. And it was one of
the things I appreciate about Clinton is that he manifestly knew he was doing wrong and carried on doing it.
That's right.
He knew he was wiggling. I remember covering, it was an obscure thing, but he went to Australia and New Zealand, and he had just put emergency tariffs on Australian and New Zealand lamb, which devastated their economies and benefited 2 sheep ranchers in Nevada.
Yeah, that's right. That's the Clinton.
And they asked him and said, well, you know, why are you doing this? And, you know, where are your allies? What are you doing to this first for? He said, well, you know, like if I were you, I'd complain about it as well. You know, he put himself in their position.
Oh, yeah.
They were being tariffed and he wasn't.
Right. He was all the sides kind of a guy, you know, that he would talk anyone out of anything and he are into something. But he was definitely lagging on Bosnia and along with Bush. One of the things Peter also did was he really went after the sort of stereotyping that we have in America in our campaigns. And he thought he might introduce a higher level of discourse. And yeah, he said, right. And he said, can you imagine doing that? And he said, in that day, he said, well, I'd like to ask them a question about, you know, how they see the other candidate. There must be something in common that they share. Let's see if they have a bond. It's something. And he said he wanted to ask them to say what they thought was admirable in the other candidate. And of course that never went anywhere. But Bush had no truck with that. He just came out with another, you know, soundbite. No matter what he was asked, but Peter really did press him on how he sort of was he went after Dukakis for his sort of what was it? He was really on Dukakis for his being a member of the ACLU, a card-carrying member of the ACLU, and Peter just got so sick of hearing it that he opened the questioning when he got his chance and said, Mr. President, you know, you have been repeating over and over again. I mean, I've heard it so many times, card-carrying ACLU Dukakis. Mr. President, why do you think that's such an important thing? You know, the ACLU, for example, represented Oliver North. So what's the problem here? So he really had him on that. But he was good at that. Very good. He has a Canadian.
What civil liberties are you opposed to, Mr. President?
As a Canadian, he really kind of felt that. I think he felt he could do that. He felt he could do a lot of things, I think, in government here, and he did. And he did a lot of good things too. One of the things he did, I think, that was very good during the Bosnian War. He brought young people over from both sides and put them in a kind of a sort of like a tent, but it was a studio, but it was made into kind of a shop that a place that they would see as a part of the war, you know. And they had one side on bleachers and the other side on the other, you know, both Serbs and Bosnian Muslims. And, you know, Peter worked at that. He worked at that and tried to get them to come together, you know. Even had, what's his name? I can't remember now, who talked about the differences they have, but all the similarities they have together. That they came originally from the same tribes, they eventually split up, and so on and so forth. But, you know, they weren't having any of it. And of course, they lived through all this. And so, you know, each one of them kind of stepped back and say, you know, I don't know how I can say anything good about this man. His people put my father in a concentration camp, and I was in a concentration camp. And that was the way it went. It really was. It was not that successful. I think Peter felt that he really didn't get what he wanted to get, and it was a big risk, and I'm glad he did it, because it really was kind of, can we do this kind of thing? Is it possible, that we can actually see beyond the hate and the destruction and misery?
Well, trying to introduce, I remember one of my famous quotes. I wrote a book about George W. Bush, Deserter.
Oh, good for you. I'll have to
And
pick that up.
one of my favorite quotes from him was, he told his speechwriters, "I don't want no nuance in my speeches." And the nuance is what's completely missing from this type of discourse. And in the case of the Balkans, for example, I think that where we lost it as media was the idea of trying to convey, once the Croats went into a third party, it was like three-dimensional chess. Nobody could get their head around it. We were used to good guys, bad guys.
Right.
And the idea that there's a third party, and they just reduced it to infinite complexity, and nobody could really get in, or let alone the idea that, well, good guys up to a point and really bad guys or not so bad guys. I mean, the idea of dealing with this degree of complexity when we try to push it all into a binary system of, rah for our side and down with them.
Yes, right. That's right. Can
I make a shout out? If there's any questions, by the way, put them in the Q&A and the chat. Well, we're doing quite well. We don't need them, really, do we?
Oh, no, we don't need it. No, I'd like to hear whatever you have. I'm up for it, whatever question you have. But what we were saying again, say that again.
I'm talking about the binary politics of it in Bosnia in particular, how you explain a complex, multi-sided situation to an audience that's really expecting my team or their team. Yes or no? Good cowboys and Indians, good guys, bad guys.
I was interviewed for the book by Bosnian TRT, and Marima Sivic was the correspondent, really delightful person. And she grew up in Bosnia in the ethnic cleansing and all of that. And her family was destroyed and so on. And so I wanted to interview her in our program, US World Report, which is usworldreport.org, if you ever want to know. And by the way, the name of the book is, I can't say it, Politics of War, My 10-Year Journey with Peter Jennings. If you want to order, it's Amazon.com. Politics of War, Peter Jennings, you'll get it. But so she was telling me, I said, what, tell me about it. What happened? She said, she said, have you ever heard of balkanization? And I said, yeah, I've heard of that. She said, well, I used to live in a country called Yugoslavia, and now it's the former Yugoslavia. And it started with that, from the top on down, slowly destroying the industry, various ministries, the press, the defense, health, education. It's all just kind of, and everything was ridiculed and demeaned. So it's destroyed from the top down. And this really hit me, because this is what I think happened under our Trump administration. It was beginning to happen. He was putting all these moles in defense, people who had never been in the department, didn't know what they're doing. He put them into education. He still got them. They're all over the place. They're still in there, and they're totally incompetent. And they're trying to be, now, of course. So this was really horrible. And we were coming to a point where, I mean, if he had another few years, we would have lost our democracy. And I still think that's up for grabs. I do believe it. Right now, I'm sitting here and I can tell you, we're this close. I don't know where we're going to end up, but half of this country believes that he is not the right president, but Biden, and the other half knows that's not true. So it's really that maybe 20% to a half. So that's a lot of people. That's millions, and so we have a problem. And I don't know how it's going to be solved. I really don't. The only way I can see is, I mean, we got rid of Trump, which helped. And Biden is very helpful. I mean, he's a good president. He's doing the best he can in the middle of a possible situation. And they do have faith in him, but he's about 45%. He runs up 50%, maybe 52, higher than any other president's been in a long time. way higher than Trump ever got. So he's sitting good. I think that's helpful. That gives some sense of stability to at least the other side is trying to think straight and not answer stupid questions about whatever they use. I misspoke there, but that horse medicine. So there is some, ivermectin. There is some rationality on that part of it, but there's entire irrationality on the other. We're about to come up, I think it's on the 16th or 17th.
I've just seen a recent scientific survey I was reading this week that people who took ivermectin as a deworming in Africa, they ended up with white and double-headed sperm. So I can see why the MAGA crowd wants it. If you get guaranteed white sperm with ivermectin,
don't tell anyone over here that. Would you please just keep that to yourself? We got enough problems, okay?
Yeah.
but there is some rationality at this point, on at least in the government, and we're functioning, and we're getting rid of a lot of people.
How do you think Peter would have? I mean, let's consider, as reporters trying to overlook it, at the current debacle in Kabul. First of all, it was obvious the game was up. Secondly, it was indeed the evacuation was in many ways a miracle, almost a Dunkirk, in getting so many people out in such a short time so efficiently. But on the other hand, there was quite clearly a catastrophic failure, since everybody concerned thought they had weeks to do it, and nobody had any idea what in a country that we've been occupying for 20 years and financing, we had no idea that the Taliban had been in and bought the army behind their backs. So, I mean, this is a failure, a success, and a strategic, victory, whatever.
There's a lot, like you say, there's both sides. Yeah, there's both sides, but it is nuanced. And as a matter of fact, Biden administration and everyone in it claims that they spent months and months telling people they would get out, and nobody moved. Well, you know how it is when you're over there, you don't listen to all that.
Because all of the military intelligence people said the Afghan government would last a few more months at least.
Yeah, exactly.
The defense of Kabul was strong, and the Afghan forces were stronger than the Taliban.
Yeah, that's of course where they were totally surprised. I mean, they just did not expect the country to just fall to pieces in a matter of days.
Have you heard any resignations from the Pentagon about this?
Not yet.
From the CIA?
No. It's not the right time. It'll come. Their names are on the list.
You think?
Oh yes, it's going to happen. Somebody was responsible for that. Come on, you know that. And they're going to die.
Of course, somebody was responsible, but that does not follow that somebody's going to be held responsible and is going to fall on the sword for it.
No, I think somebody's going to be held responsible. Somebody. I don't know how they're going to handle it, but I'm sure they will.
Well, that's we'll have to wait till the major VP job at Boeing is up, or
right.
Just to move them into, I suppose.
Exactly. Well, do we have any questions out there?
I don't believe we do. I think we're also coming towards the end.
Yes, we're coming to the end here.
Yeah.
Well, this has been delightful, Ian, and thank you.
You have a copy of your book to wave about?
I certainly did. Oh, yes, here we go. Hold on a second. This is my own.
Prompt you. This is a PSA for you.
I know. You're absolutely right. I'm going to get it right now. This is my own personal copy, and I don't know if you can see it or not.
Well thumbed.
Can you see it?
Hold it still. It's the auto for The Politics of War. There we are.
Politics of War, My 10 Years with Peter Jennings.
Yes, and that's a younger, handsomer Peter Jennings, not a younger, handsomer Tom.
He was about 30 something there, and at the top of his mark, and with a lot more to go.
Okay, we really are coming towards the end now. So this is Ian Williams with the Foreign Press Association, and we've been sort of in memoriam for Peter Jennings, and we've used the occasion as a sort of, how should we say, a retrospective on 9/11. And I have to thank Tom Osborne, my old colleague from the United Nations, for writing the book, which you can buy on Amazon, as he's consistently reminded you. That's amazon.com.
Right. Peter
Tom
Jennings,
Osborne.
The Politics of War.
Right. So we have, Caitlin, do you have the Chiron for the next things coming up? We have a wide selection. Incidentally, at the moment, we've actually just sending out today an announcement about 9/11 and the role of foreign correspondents, because I know several of our people, at least one friend of mine has treated for unique cancer as a result of exposure down there.
Oh, hey, Ian, I have to tell you, they're taking me out of Zoom now. My hour is up, or whatever it is.
Okay, well, here we go. Look out for Brazil in the Age of Bolsonaro, our next one with Richard Lapper. And we have more coming up soon. And please join the Foreign Press Association and, contribute, give us ideas, bring us your dead, your suffering, your weak, and all the rest of it. And we'll expose them on the Zoom. But thanks very much, Tom. And
it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, Ian. Good to see you too. And maybe we'll meet in New York sometime.
Yes, mañana.
Mañana. Bye-bye.